We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go.
Well, hello, and welcome to episode 102 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Mike and I were recently joined from the United States by Lisa Ekman, the author of Deprogramming Democrats and unEducating the Elites, How I Escaped the Progressive Cult. Here is part two of our wide-ranging interview with Lisa.
I think you've moved to the right on a number of issues, and because I know you talk about how people on the left are kind of aligned on printing money, climate change, we've already mentioned, identity politics. In that kind of journey across, did you have any sort of influencers? Anyone particularly you think, oh, that's helped me kind of confirm my views? Anything that helped you on that way, if you like?
Well, yeah, I actually, and I usually include this in the story of my awakening, but my partner, he and I actually got together in 2019, and he started, asking me a lot of questions, which helped open my eyes. He's a very independent thinker and was sort of not politically involved in the way that I was. I think that there are a lot of people sort of in the conservative movement that were helpful here in the United States. I started reading more of people who were conservative thinkers and just opening my mind to a lot of people. But I would say specifically, interestingly enough, and he's here in the States, quite controversial figure at the moment, listening while he was still on Fox News to Tucker Carlson, who prior to my awakening, I would have not said very nice things about, probably. I remember thinking, wow, he's making a lot of sense. And then, looking at some of the more classical free market thinkers and conservative thinkers did help as well.
No, absolutely. Some years ago, although I'd always been fairly sort of on the right of politics, I got listening to a few people podcasts from the States when the UK market for sort of political podcasts didn't really exist. Dennis Prager, you may have heard of.
Yeah.
Now Prager University is probably the main thing he's known for. Larry Elder, who ended up running for the Republican candidate for governor of California. And a guy called Charlie Sykes I used to listen to a lot, who was out of Wisconsin. Became a very big never Trumper, but there we go. But no, it's interesting how that journey comes along. So you've obviously made this journey, and I guess this is the if you like the next part of the book, which talks about how you've seen things turn against us, and you've talked about you've already mentioned the government trying to control information and how that was used against us in the Brexit referendum and Trump. And for those that don't know, Dan and I sort of ran the Vote Leave campaign in Croydon during the referendum, so we're very much involved in that. So how did you see that manifest? How did you see that use of government against us? And perhaps if you could then go on to talk a bit about what you think the solutions are.
I think that there is two pieces to how that was used against us. There is propaganda, and then there is censorship. You mentioned that you would hear newscasters all saying the same thing. We used to have here in the States about 50 different companies that owned media back in the 1980s, and we're down to about 6. And so when a message gets put out through the media, you often see not only are they saying the same thing, but they're using the exact same words and they're repeating them over and over again. And all of that is part of brainwashing. And indoctrination is through repetition is a big part of that, and using the same words. So here in the United States, we've had our intelligence agencies involved in our media And this is something that was came out in the 1970s through the church hearings. Through there was an operation called Operation Mockingbird to place intelligence agents in all of our broadcast and print media, and as a result, we see a lot of messaging and propaganda coming through our mainstream media. In particular, I think it was after Brexit and after Donald Trump won, and what then we started to see this concerted effort of casting anyone on the right as who might be considered a quote unquote populist, as an authoritarian threat. That as you if you watch what is said about Donald Trump, I mean, I think you probably had some coverage of the quote
Oh,
unquote no kings rallies here.
yes, indeed. Yeah, yes.
You
Less
know,
so
like,
than in the past, but yes.
well, and I mean, it's like thinking about that, it's pretty ludicrous, right? This is a man who won the popular vote. He and is actually implementing many of the things he promised to do on the campaign. And in no way has he ever acted like a monarch. But that is part of what goes on. And part of what I detail in one of the chapters on propaganda and censorship in the book is sort of the playbook that U.S. has used to foment color revolutions in other countries. And it's through the control of social media, which is exactly what we saw, for example, during COVID, right? Working directly, and this has all come out now with Facebook and Twitter at the time to censor anyone who was going against what the COVID narrative was. And it is used to foment um, dissent away from certain things. And in the US too, they do it to create unrest in order to topple governments. And so that is what they had started to do here in the US. And I know that there have been a lot of things going on that are similar, but not exactly the same in the UK as well. So um, what are the solutions to this?
Yeah, that's the. I mean, and you're right. Sorry, I just reflect on some of that. I mean, certainly during the Brexit referendum, there was a lot of information, misinformation put out, particularly by government agencies like Ofcom over here, which is, I don't know what what might be the equivalent in the US of Ofcom.
It's not exactly the same, but the FCC.
Yeah, that's it. Um, who put out a lot of investigations into people that then went away. Lots of suggestions that social media was paid for by foreign countries when it wasn't. And I think in 2016, the reach of social media wasn't what it is today, and there was a lot overestimated by what it done in the UK. And it was a big. A big push against us. And then during lockdown, there were literally lists made of journalists that weren't pro-lockdown and by government agencies to act against them, which is a terrible thing to do and something I don't think we've seen since the Second World War in this country. But so yes, sorry, I only emphasise that so the need for change is great, and yeah. So how do you think we have this world now? I think where there's and I don't know what you feel with this, that there is a ruling group of politicians and people in government who feel that traditional freedoms are no longer sacrosanct, and that it's reasonable to put across their agendas through the mechanism of government. How do we kind of push back against that? And indeed, you've written about this. So what sort of thoughts you've got to share on that?
Well, I think I 100% agree with you on that. I call them here in the US, I call them the establishment. And that's where really the uneducating the elites comes in the title of the book. But I think there's a few things. I think that the first thing is that people need to question everything, and follow the money and begin to look at really where are dollars going, who are we funding, who's benefiting from it, and where does the money go? And I think here in the US, when we had Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, we were getting a pretty clear look at some of the techniques and the pathways that our government was using to foment change, that was not necessarily in line with the consent and will of the people, both here at home and abroad. I think that,
Just jumping if I may for a moment, Elon, one of the things the Doge team found out, and this is, I think this is through the USAID, that the wife of a politician over here, a politician called Rory Stewart, who's a very left-wing conservative, so what I would describe as you might call him a rhino out there, if you like, from the Republican
Mhm.
side, someone who was all about controlling, keeping the establishment, doing as you're told, and conforming to the view of the establishment. His wife was being funded to quite a sizable chunk for some preposterous scheme in Afghanistan, and it was obvious. I want to maybe be slightly careful of what I say here. It seemed surprising that money was doing anything other than funding someone that was towing the party line. Um, yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I think that that is true a lot of the time. I think that we also saw that, a lot of these protests are not natural. They're people being paid to go and protest. And I think, one of the things that I say is get involved locally. I think part of what has happened here in the States is that we've gotten really, really far away from the vision that the founders of our country had in terms of a very small federal government that essentially did a couple of things, protected our borders, had a military to defend us from invasion, and created positive trading, economic cooperation between our states that could then make us economically powerful. And now we've gotten to the place where the federal government regulates almost every aspect of our lives. And I will say I am not suggesting any sort of, revolution, any
no,
action against the government. Just to be very clear, I am not doing that. But what I am saying is that to take the power back to the state and local level, and remove some of that economic power that the federal government has here in the United States, and to become more involved, to start creating our communities again, and to, um, you know, hold our government to account. I mean, I think that the Department of Government Efficiency revealed quite a bit of corruption going on, and it's just sort of normal. Here in the States, why is it that a member of Congress may come into Congress um, without very much money and leave a multimillionaire? I mean, that shouldn't happen, right? How is
yes.
that happening? So I think there's a lot of things we can look at from that perspective. And I think that one of the things is really looking at encouraging people to really evaluate, what have all these government programs done for us? How is our country better? How are the people who are receiving aid through these government programs? How have we benefited them, or have we? And in many cases, when you look at a lot of these welfare programs or these other programs that we have, they've actually made people's lives worse, and they've created generational dependency, which um, certainly doesn't help in the long run. So again, it goes back to questioning everything. And, I think trying to also, this is the other thing that I really focus on, is trying to see uh, people who think differently than you in a really positive light as a fellow countryman or woman, as opposed to an enemy. And focusing on those values that we may all share in common with, even though we may take very different political positions, and not assume some sort of moral superiority or moral inferiority of someone who thinks differently than you do. And really try to understand where that person is coming from. Because a big part of what the government relies on, I think there are two things they rely on to keep us under control and to keep us from focusing our attention on them. And that is using fear through things like COVID lockdowns and things like identity politics here in the States, and divide and conquer, setting us against each other, even though we may very much have a lot in common if we just took a few moments to have a respectful, open-minded conversation with those that we think differently than. And I think that starts, to build local movements and to sort of reclaim our power in a respectful way that recognizes, the greatness of the UK, the greatness of the United States, and wanting to conserve it and build it together as fellow citizens.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you picked up on there. I think they're both really key points. One I would say is hopefully everyone listening to this wants to, or in reading your book, wants to live in a liberal democracy, and I mean that in the sense of a free democratic society. And to do that, you kind of have to accept the other side's going to be in charge half the time. You can't see it as the end of the world. You've got to get on with your life. Uh, uh, and it's, it might not be what you want, but it's got to be something you can get along with. Because that is what makes a functioning democracy, is that every so often we change those in charge. The other point is the local point, and I'm often astonished at this at a local level, at how much hollering there is between parties when what we're talking about is parking for the town centre, or whether we need a new school in this area or that area, where a sewage line runs, where a water line runs. This shouldn't be complex. This shouldn't require politics in any terrible way. I just want my bins collected once a week. I don't need you to have an argument about it. Just find the best contractor and get it done. And that is surely areas that most of these parties, most of us as a people, can come together.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I will say something about your first point. You should, yes, when the person who you don't agree with is in power, that's still your leader. But I would also encourage everyone to think about the powers that they want their own leaders to have, based on the principal idea that someone you disagree with is going to have that power too. So,
Absolutely.
do you really want to give, and I would say here in the States, I would say this to people, you really want to give the Biden administration this power? If Trump gets reelected, you want Trump to have this power, you know? And thinking about these two men both having the same power. And I think that's part of what I would also encourage everyone to do, is examine your own views, and try to get to the principles behind why you hold them. Because often I think people take very unprincipled political stances that, if they were forced to break down to um, principle, you don't get very far when you start believing the ends justify the means, for example. In terms of a principled stance, if the ends justify the means, and the person you don't like is in charge, are you really wanting to give them that power? So, really, my story is one about someone who really didn't examine her views for a very long time, and then once I did, I was forced to understand, how far I had strayed from the um, the principles that I actually held dear.
Coming to that realization that your views can change over time, I think is right and proper, isn't it? I mean, we all mature, we all have different challenges in life, and uh, not just in politics, across a whole range of things, people's ideas change. You mentioning the other person in charge, of course, the greatest argument over here against a abolition of the monarchy is always used as President Thatcher or President Blair. Would you want them to be in charge of our country as a president rather than just as a prime minister? And of course, people people then suddenly get concerned about the power of the state in that position. At least the prime minister has some control over them in a way that a president obviously has a step up in power. No, that's excellent. Thanks for that, and obviously really fascinating kind of read of a book of your journey there. Are there any last sort of thoughts you've got on things you'd want to say to people, and then perhaps most importantly, how can people get the book?
Sure, well, I'll start with that first, the last one first. The book is available on Amazon, or it's also available on barnesandnoble.com, and you can check out my website at deprogrammingdemocrats.com if you want to learn more about me or the book. And I think my parting words are, I remain hopeful for our liberal democracies. We call ourselves, our constitutional republic here, but I remain hopeful because people, I think, are stepping up more and they're willing to speak the truth to power and not letting fear control them. They're becoming more awake to the manipulation that the government is using, and I think that we're turning a corner of enough people being willing to stand up and say no in order to protect uh, the values of our Constitution here in the U.S. and the liberal values. And again, I don't consider the left here in the U.S. liberal anymore. I think they're progressive and very illiberal, but the liberal values and the freedom that helped make our countries what they are. And so I remain optimistic and encourage everyone to, you know, examine your own beliefs, be able to explain the principles behind them, to question everything that the government tells you, and to follow the money, and to hold the government to account for the power that we have given it.
Thank you very much for that.
So, Mike, what have we got on our website?
A few items on the website, a couple of articles by the Libertarian Party UK, obviously something that's much bigger in the US than over here, but still an interesting voice in the UK. One talking about the recent budget and describing it as a slap in the face for working people, well worth a read. And then a bigger topic, or a more longer term topic, the surveillance state and live facial recognition, something we have in Croydon, and perhaps a concern as well as something that may help with crime, but a concern in the longer term. Also, we got an article on there about condemning plans for digital ID from the SDP. So, again, a couple of bigger issues and something to read on the budget on our website.
Well, if you'd like to write for our website or have any subjects you'd like us to cover, do please get in contact. You can do so via the Twitter at CroydonConst, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, contact@croydonconstitutionalist.uk. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. Well, thank you very much to Lisa for joining us today. It's good to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you to everybody for listening. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Stay free, everybody.